Let's stop that for a minute. Just remind. Okay.
You're good.
So this is the November 15th, 2022 meeting of the Bristol Planning Commission. Calling the meeting to order at 7:01. We probably, for Peggy's benefit, we probably should do a roll call. I see Rob. I see Slim. Shannon's here on site. See Melissa. Fred has can't make it. I see John Moyers online. Jeff is on site and I'm on site. So the next item, the first item is to review the agenda for addition, removal, adjustment of any items. Once again, I will suggest we move administrative matters to come in after item 3. Since we have Adam here and we don't need to waste his time with that. Also, underneath administrative matters, item D, discussion of miscellaneous correspondence. There's a couple of additional items that will touch upon tonight that they came about yesterday and today. So I believe, and those are the changes I see on the agenda. Does anybody else see any changes or want to make changes? Okay, so we're set. So we will skip to item 3, which is continuing business of the bylaw modernization grant with Addison County Regional Planning, and Adam's here to guide us through that.
Great. Good evening. Thank you for having me again. Happy to be back here. Our last couple of meetings, we have kind of gone over our parameters, right? We've defined what the Planning Commission does and our roles and responsibilities with other boards and the zoning administrator. We've talked a little bit about implementing things. And I hope I gave you a roadmap as to where we were going as far as amendments to the to your zoning regulations. And tonight we really start in earnest with those amendments. So just again, I would say, to reiterate our charge, it's really to evaluate Bristol zoning and specifically districts within the Bristol Village planning area. So the area that you have specified as the village planning area within your town plan, for potential changes that would improve the opportunity to build new housing. So while we're going to look at just the districts within the village planning area, there are other places in your zoning regs that that affect basically everywhere that might also help us develop new. Are you pulling up the map, Chris?
Do you want the whole map or just the village planning map?
It depends on how familiar your members are. So let's why don't you pull up the whole one and we'll look at the town of Bristol, and then we can go right to the
back to share it with the gang online. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So town of Bristol and all your zoning districts, your village planning area is basically right in the center around the village. So you can see Chris's cursor is circling it. That's the area that we are primarily going to deal with once we get into zone specific matters. But there are things in your definition and other things that we can think about that will also improve other areas in your whole town. So if you want to just focus in on the village planning area, thanks, Chris. So your village planning area is a little funny in that basically almost every single zoning district that you have in town, there's a portion of in your village planning area. We're primarily going to focus on your village business district, which is in purple, and it's outlined by your designated downtown, which has a purple outline on it. We'll focus on the ROC district. That's residential, office, commercial. That's in gold. We'll focus on the darker blue, which is your
High density res.
Thank you. High density residential. We'll focus on your village mix district, which are the cross-hatched areas within your village planning area. And then also out basically in the little tail on your village in Rockydale. And those are the 4 districts that we're going to really focus in on. Did I say village residential?
No.
No, excuse me. The lighter blue is village residential.
Yeah.
So that's the other district that we will really focus in on. You can see you have some conservation in your village district. You have some RA5. You have some commercial. You have some RA1. If you want to think about, you could think about changing densities on those districts, but for the purposes of are going forward in your village district, I think I'm really going to focus in on the other 5 districts that we've talked about. Okay, but before we get to districts, I want to talk about things, some definitions and some regulations. So first, I want to talk about multifamily housing. And again, our charge is, what are some things we can do within your zoning regulations or subdivision regulations that will improve the opportunity to build new housing in Bristol? Okay, and we spent a good amount of time last meeting talking about the need for housing, and specifically the need for smaller housing. Okay, so Chris has pulled up your basically your definitional section from your current zoning. And there are 2 definitions here that I want to look at with you. The first one is just dwelling accessory, because we're going to do that later and there's no reason to come back to it. So a secondary dwelling established in conjunction with and clearly subordinate to a primary dwelling, whether a part of the same structure or primary dwelling. And you can see that's further defined in section 404, which we will go to. The one I really want to focus on here is a multifamily dwelling. And basically a building or portion thereof designed exclusively for occupancy by 3 or more families. So multifamily in your current definition basically includes everything that's a building with 3 or 300 units. Once you're above 3, it's multifamily. So Chris, can I also next ask you to take me to, let's see, page 15, and that's your use table,
I assume that's the section you want.
That's the section I want the housing section. So if you look right up at the top of your use table, basically along the top row are all of your abbreviations of all of your zoning districts. So VB, village business, ROC, residential, office, commercial, village mixed, HDR, high density residential, VR1. So basically the first 6 columns are the ones that we are looking at. You can see that multifamily dwelling is the third line down of specific uses. And you can see that in the village business district, which is the smaller, it's basically Main Street. It requires a site plan. It's permitted, but you have to submit a site plan. In every other district, they are not permitted. 3 families or more are not permitted in the ROC. They are permitted as conditional uses in the village mixed district and in the HDR district and in the village residential district. So I want to start this meeting with basically two questions to you. The first, well, is do you believe that we should make amendments to either the definition of multifamily dwelling or allow for site plan review or just permitted a permitted use for multifamily dwellings within the districts or certain districts within your village planning district, and we can take them one by one. So we'd ask you to decide on the ROC and then the HDR and then the village residential, and then the village mixed. So are these ideas that might improve the ability to develop housing in Bristol and something that the Planning Commission might support? So
just one question.
Yeah.
On it. So when you talk about changing the definition, are you looking at breaking that out to more define?
Yes.
Yeah.
Specifically, what I might plant as a seed for you for changing the definition would be, rather than have basically one definition of multifamily housing that goes to from 3 to 3 million or however big it is there some way that you would all like to break it out, like multifamily housing from 3 to 6 or 3 to 10 and then greater than 10, or some other number? So, and I guess as you think about that, I'd tell you to think about the firehouse apartments that you just owned or just opened as an example. And then I guess I'd ask all of you to think about other examples of multifamily housing or potential buildings that might work for multifamily housing that exist within the fabric of each of your districts. So are there old houses or old other structures in, say, the high density residential district that should or should not be multifamily housing? And we can ask that question for each of the districts. And remember, our goal is to create more housing, but your goal is also to preserve is, I'm not sure preserve is the way I want it, but maintain your village fabric. You don't want to, I assume you like the village of Bristol and are trying to make improvements, not make wholesale changes that might impact it negatively. So we're trying to find that sweet spot. And I guess
that's a historically hot button topic and discussion, I believe, from my short time here even. So there's a lot of mixed feelings on that one because of, like you mentioned, the character or fabric or however you want to term it of the village and the potential changes that would bring.
Can I ask a question? So in the high density residential area, there are currently a number of multifamily dwellings. Does this assume that they received a conditional use for that, or were they built before?
Prior to this existing packet, most residential was all permitted. So so a lot of people were just converting apartments,
converting houses into multifamily. Like there's a big one at the corner of Pleasant Street and Maple Street, a big huge one. That's a big 3-story house. Okay.
I mean, the one issue that we've run into just historically with multifamilies, we've tried to, as some folks have come in to try to look at wastewater and parking on small lots. There's not enough dirt for both. So those are just some limitations as we think this through.
The parking you all can control, the wastewater you really can't. So I guess with those examples, I'd think about it. Yes, you can change parking if you choose to. You can't change wastewater necessarily unless you're the the town is willing to make a big investment.
And the
So-
parking's a challenge.
Yeah, with the parking, with no on-street parking, how does that work?
That's not an issue I was prepared to address tonight, but I mean, you make on-street parking, or you make some places available for on-street parking, or you make sure that the requirements for parking per unit are enough to adequately address unit needs generally, but not so egregious. You don't require, necessarily 5 parking lots for parking spaces for every unit. I think, yeah, you're at 1 right now. I don't know if you're gonna go without on-street parking, you're gonna have a hard time changing that.
And on-street parking is a challenge with our current parking ordinances and snow removal and select board mentality. That's gonna be a challenge. I'm just throwing that one out there.
And that's something that they're gonna control, not you. So, right, the select board's gonna have to approve. If you want to make parking changes, they're not necessarily, you can change them in the regs. But you also need to know that the select board's gotta change. If you make dramatic changes in your regs and are counting on the select board to make changes to open up on-street parking, you need to have your ducks in a row beforehand. Otherwise, you're gonna create a potentially bad situation.
Melissa, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, it seems like it would make sense to kind of break out that multifamilies. I mean, I would think so. I understand that conditional means that, people could ask it, okay, I want to take my home and divide it and I'm going to live here and someone else, I'm going to rent out the other half of the house. But conditional just means they have to, what exactly does that mean, conditional? I know you have to meet certain conditions, but who decides what those conditions are, and do those conditions change depending on whoever's reviewing it?
Yeah, so I'll take this, and if Chris wants to chime in, I'll gladly have his help. So conditional use review means basically that it's allowed, but it's not specifically permitted. It's not a permit that the zoning administrator can give. In order for someone to get a conditional permit, they are going to need to go to your development review board. And one of the first, there are, I guess I'd say, 2 sections to your any conditional use review. The first section is basically, well, the first question is this use appropriate for this area? Right? So does it comply with our town plan? So that's a big hurdle in and of itself, or potentially a big hurdle in and of itself, as compared to going to the zoning administrator for a permit. So it's harder to get. I'd also note that in this last round of zoning regulations, you all put in site plan review. I would tell you that conditional use review is it appropriate for this area? And there are some big conditions. Once you decide it's appropriate, then you kind of move on to the equivalent of site plan review. So site plan review looks at on-site items. It looks at things like lighting and signage and parking and things of that nature. Conditional use review look at the appropriateness of the use for the area that it's going into. So it's a significantly higher threshold. Anything you want to add to that, Chris?
I mean, to me, one of the big differences too is that conditional site plan is a permitted use that we're making sure that it fits, that the parking and lighting are good. Conditional use is not guaranteed. The board could, in theory, deny a conditional use outright if it doesn't meet criteria. So that's the other part, is there is criteria that they follow. Some of it is some conjecture, but that is the theory behind conditional use.
Right. But the site plan is kind of conditional too, right? It has to conform to whatever the zoning laws are zoning rules are at that time.
So the way I'd say that to you, Melissa, is that, and Chris just said it, site plan, the use is permitted, but we want to look at your plans for parking.
Right.
And we want to look at your plans for lighting and things of that nature. Where conditional use is, the first question is this appropriate in this area? Which is a much different question, right? It's one thing to say, yep, that use is permitted here, and we're going to look at your parking lot to make sure it conforms with our regs. And another thing to say, well, I don't know whether that use is appropriate or not.
Right.
So one of the ways you could make housing easier, if you chose to, would be to move from a conditional use to either a site plan or just a permitted in specific districts.
Right.
And
that would be easier. That would be easier to do, or something we would decide to do if we want to allow 3 family dwellings in one structure. So that would mean we should break it out. You know what I'm saying? You break it out to whatever, use a 2-family, multifamily, maybe 2-family, 3-family, or 4-family, and make those, the site permit.
so
what I'm
for, yeah,
But
so for the
that's what
district,
you were asking at the beginning, right? Do we want to break it down?
you're absolutely right, Melissa. And I would say that your instinct is good as well, in that it may be easier for people to change something from conditional to site plan if they know that it's a multifamily unit with 6 units or 3 units versus a
Right.
multifamily unit with 50 or 100 or
Right,
20
right.
or whatever that number might be.
Yeah. Which might be different in the high density in that of the village, but it might be different of what we would want to allow farther out. You might farther out, you might a 6 family, like a small apartment block or something like that, but you wouldn't want that in the village, in the high density area. So
When I think about site plan versus conditional, I mean, site plan sort of, it's assumed that it's allowable as long as it fits the standards that are set for that district. Conditional, it may not be allowed unless certain conditions are considered and attached and adhered to by the applicant. Something is sort of assumed almost not to be if there are no conditions. So then there's hearing process to consider and perhaps attach conditions under which that could be done. And further beyond that, I would say, it seems like the 3 or more line is a good one. And I'd be reluctant, depending on what the level was, to make a lower level of review for multi-family dwellings, larger than, I don't know, a certain size. If you look at the process that went on for the Firehouse affordable housing development, it actually, went pretty well. And that was a conditional use, I believe, and they had to go through a pretty elaborate process, but it made sure that the public had a chance to have input, and the town did too, and it resulted in a good thing. So I wouldn't want to say anything 9 or less units would just be site plan or just permitted. I think at a certain point, at least within the village planning area, that over a certain size, I don't know if that's 3 or more or 4 or more, but whatever, something in that neighborhood, probably for me, would require a conditional use review.
Well, that's what I meant. Break that 3 seems kind of low to me. If somebody, some of these big houses, you could have 4 apartments in them, and they're still maintain the look of, of the village, of the homes. So to break it down, I'm thinking like, maybe three or multifamily, 3 to 4, and then maybe 5 to 8 or something like that, but to break it down, not just say, 8 or less, just to break it down to actual numbers. And I mean, I would think that at the place here at the, by the fire station, they are very used to having to do everything they had to do to get that approved. Whereas somebody that owns a home and maybe wants to do it has no clue what they're gonna have to do if it's conditional. If they want to, add one apartment, so there's 3 families or 3 people living in that home, to not make it so difficult for them to do that. If they meet the other requirements of parking and water uses and all that is considered under site planning anyway.
Hey, Chris, as we're talking about this, since it is conditional in most of these and site plan and the other, how much of a challenge is this posed to people coming in that wanted to do this under the conditional guidelines?
That's not what hangs them up. The conditional use is easy. In all reality, what is the bigger issue is our debt is what we have for density, because most of all of HDR is 1 dwelling unit per quarter acre. So if you don't have a half acre, you can't even put a duplex on it. So
Okay, so
that's where
changing this to permitted or site plan doesn't really gain us anything in the long run if we don't address the density.
not like HDR is the tough one, because there's such small lots already that converting those over. So I think there's a way to be creative to resolve that. I mean, we're not the first community to come up with this issue, because I think if we could figure out a way to possibly adjust density for multifamily versus single, I don't know how that's done. But as far as the conditional use, whether it's conditional use or site plan, it's I'm good either way. But Melissa, your example of like somebody wanting to add to their existing home, that works now, but in 10 years or 20 years, when they sell that property and they're no longer there, and the person who buys it purely as an investment property, and
Right.
that's what we see now. So it does change the scope, because we were trying to be nice to Sue and Joe so they could do this for their house. Well, 10 years later, they don't own it, and it's just owned by some investment company that really doesn't care. So we got to keep it at
what difference would that make if they have 3 occupants in the home? If it's an investment,
Traditionally, owner occupied are much better
I see what you're
maintained
saying.
and present much better than strictly investment rental
right,
properties.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So
I mean, I don't know if you can't, is it possible for a home to be a conditional in its use, that if you purchase this property, you have to occupy it? That's not,
So
is
let's
that
get
possible?
back, let's get back to the question, and we haven't heard
Sure.
anything from Slim or Shannon. So Slim, I don't know if you've got any thoughts at this point on the definition of multifamily.
there you go.
Oh, he's still muted. You're there.
No, I'm not. Not too much, but I think there is such a big difference between 3 and 300 that there might well be a little breakdown, as Melissa was suggesting. It seems, well, no, not really. That the inner village is pretty dense as it is. I don't think there's room for too much new construction. So you're mostly talking about breaking up the bigger houses here now?
Right.
Yes?
That's what I was talking about. or thinking about. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't have
Shannon?
anything, I don't have anything more.
Okay, thanks, Shannon.
I guess I'm agreeing with Slim. I'm thinking when you get past two-family, Bristol doesn't have a lot of room for growth, or we don't really, not definitely in the village, I'm talking village. And so it does come down to how are we gonna talk about those bigger homes that older people are living in that could stand to have some rental income.
So, Adam, could you give us some? I don't know if this might put you on the spot, but in other areas
What
like,
I'm here for.
let's pick on Middlebury or Virgins. I mean, they must have considered this question as well.
Mhm. Yep, and they have allowed bigger multifamily units, so if you think of Armory Lane in Virgins. There are a few, condo type developments down in Middlebury, there are a few elderly developments down in Middlebury. Where they have allowed more density. And they have allowed larger multifamily dwellings. So if you go in the Marble Works, there's a big one in there, just next to Shaw's. So there are places within both of those, the town of Middlebury and the city of Virgins, where they've allowed larger multifamily dwelling units.
And do they have a stepped multifamily definition or?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I believe they did it with density. I believe there are places where they are subject to site plan review, but not conditional review, but I don't know. I don't know what their definitions of multifamily are in Virgins or Middlebury.
And all of those were all new construction type, or,
Most of them.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the Marble Works is an anomaly. We don't have a Marble Works type building.
Yeah, but now I'm thinking of Middlebury, since you raised it, there's that conversion that was just done at that intersection of Seminary Street and Washington Street, where that school was turned into 6 apartments.
Yes.
And there's also where the old Vermont Family Federal Credit Union used to be on Washington Street, and that was turned into 4 or 5, maybe 6 apartments.
We're supposed to.
And I would say, as well, the school is a new one. But the VFCU conversion, it's not an owner occupied, but it's very well kept. So I'm very leery of generalizations that, owner occupied buildings are going to be better kept than landlord owned buildings.
Oh, I can show you both.
Yeah, I know. I can walk
sides.
around town and see plenty of, examples of both. So I think that the generalization, that's sort of policy by anecdote.
And that's what I was actually trying to get, when I was talking about, was it just a multifamily is a multifamily. I don't care who's in it or how we're dealing with it, treat it as a 3 families of 3 family.
So I guess the other caveat with Virgins and Middlebury is they have municipal sewer, which we do not have, which may or may not allow those types of development that they've done.
It certainly makes it a lot easier. Right? It certainly makes it a lot easier.
I mean, I look at like firehouse apartments. I mean, I think they burned up close to an acre of land just for wastewater. And then another acre for the business park. I mean, so wastewater's challenge eats up, you are correct.
So I guess what's their pleasure here? Do we want to entertain changing this definition? Do we want some more research, or do we want to just leave it the way it is, or something else?
I'd like to propose that I think the 3 or more line there is quite appropriate for Bristol. Anybody that's 20 or 10 or 50, it's all going to have to go through that process, which it should, to get close conditional review. And I don't see rationale to change that. I don't see a strong reason to change to 3 or more. It seems like it's suiting us well. And I'm hesitant to create a sort of another layer of review that's somewhere between
Another. Oh, no.
site plan and conditional, just based on the number of units, when 3 or more kind of covers it. Like, I've been through the process to do a 4-family dwelling, and I should have answered all the questions that were asked of me, and I did in the conditional use review, because 4 units on a site in the village is something that the neighbors ought to think about, and the town ought to think about. And I was, pleased to go through that process. And it just seems like it's something we could leave as a 3 or more, and call it a day on that question.
Any other thoughts?
Well,
Is that-
I'm not-
How much, is the conditional process that you go through it seems like it's easier. It would be easier for someone who owns properties and this is what they do, as opposed to someone just wanting to do this with their home. Do they have a resource, or does the town provide a resource to
think
help
that
them
that's-
through that? You know what I'm saying?
That's not germane to the conversation.
Right, no,
So let's talk about,
okay, I think it is, but if nobody else does, then.
so Jeff, you had a.
Well, I mean, I think it's a reasonable thing to say, is 3 the appropriate number? John seems to think it is, but it's just a number that's been picked. So could it be multifamily is 4 or more? Which allows then 3 becomes an easier thing to do, presumably. Or if you want to do that, I just don't know that we know that yet. I think it's certainly worth. It's certainly worth. I think Adam's question was, is that something you might want to entertain? Not, do you want to do it?
Sure, I
Okay.
didn't necessarily
Right,
expect.
right.
Yeah, so I didn't think it would be a decision. Yeah, it's not a decision because you haven't even done the study yet. The decision comes afterwards, after the study, not before the study. But I think it's something that, at least for now, could be entertained.
Yeah, I'm happy to entertain. I don't see that the 3 or more line is holding us back. I haven't seen any problems with that. I haven't seen anybody who wanted to do 4 but couldn't because of some holdback. Of the Firehouse Apartments is 20 or so units.
Right.
They went through a rigorous process that resulted in a really good solution for the developers and the community, I think. And
I guess
I
I'm
don't
just
think-
thinking more a person who owns a home, not a developer. Not,
Yeah, I mean, when I went through the process, I
yeah.
was not really a developer, it's just me. And
right,
if you open up the bylaws and go through, it offers line by line guidance.
okay,
How much parking do you have, or how much do you need? Various other things about lighting and that sort of thing. And it's, I just sat down and wrote answers line by line as they popped up. It's not that complex. If you do get into the realm of 10 or 15 units, then you're probably talking about a professional developer, and they have the resources
that's
to
not-
do that.
yeah. I'm talking 3 or 4. I'm not talking splitting out the multifamily into like 10 different, levels.
So Jeff, if you were to bring your concept along a little bit, if you were to change that to 4 or more, then all of a sudden the 3 unit would fall where?
Well, that would be another discussion. Would it be a site plan? Or would it be permitted? That's the second part of the discussion, if you wanted to change it. I don't think we're ready to make any decisions on that yet, but that's really the.
So let me bring you a couple examples of splits potentially that you all can take a look at. And I guess I'd have this question for you, Chris, and it's, I'm going to move us a little bit in the discussion. I'll bring examples of splits and mixed units that might make sense in towns around Vermont similar to Bristol.
Yep.
You know, same population, similar densities, that type of thing. Moving on then to site plan versus conditional versus permitted. I guess, Chris, my question for you is, does the DRBC itself is overloaded, or does it have more work with, well, it does have more work with conditional. It's got a bigger analysis to do. Would it have an opinion as to we should or shouldn't be doing conditional use reviews on all of these particular uses or in these particular areas?
I mean, our DRB is not overworked. Okay. They've got a lot of, I don't think John, it's been what, 3 months since y'all have met. It's the site, some conditional uses coming in there, it's a half an hour discussion and it's done. And some are 4 meetings because scope and scale carry on draw the meeting out sometimes. I think that, and this is just me standing on my soapbox, is the conditional use may be overused in a few of our locations for the multifamily. If we were able to tier it out, if you could get it to like even a 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 and above, that 3 could fall almost site plan across the board. It just gives a little bit of oversight, but it doesn't, it's not an anchor on the applicant who's trying to do it.
Okay, so the
You
next.
put
the
that
next
a lot
place-
better than I did.
That's why he gets the big bucks.
Yeah,
So the
but
next.
that's
place
what I
have-
was thinking, yeah.
I'm gonna take you is, let's say your definitions stay the same, or let's say you choose to bifurcate them for multifamily somehow. The next question would be, and we will get to density and parking and other things that impact it later, but for right now, let's look at basically our levels of review and look at the multifamily housing. And basically the question then becomes, are there districts, zoning districts, where site plan permitted, or conditional are more appropriate for multiple family housings? And I'm gonna open up the floor again to that question.
I would say that anywhere in any district, if somebody's proposing 50 homes, it should be a conditional use, no matter where that is. So then we could work that down, 40, 30, 20, where is that line? I don't know, but you know, inside the village planning area, which is the current and future village, you know, anything that's going to be 3 or 4 or more ought to be conditionally reviewed, because that's the densest area. That's the area where it's going to have impact or potential impact, you know, in terms of light and traffic and circulation, views, and the other categories of impact or potential impact. So to me, I wish I had a better sense of why we were asked the question. It seems like asking, do we want 3 or more, is like we're looking for a solution. It's a problem looking for a solution, or it's a solution looking for a problem. I haven't seen that we're chafing up against 3 anywhere. I haven't seen that developers are coming in saying, well, I'm not going to do this development because it's only 3. Is there anything like that? Is there any pressure on us to change from the current definition?
So our charge when we took on this grant was, are there changes that we can make to Bristol's unified development regulations that will make it easier to develop housing? The presumption, I guess, that I'm making here is that it's easier to just get a permit from Chris than it is to go through site plan review, and it's easier to go through just site plan review than it is to basically go through a conditional use review. So it assumes that there is some time, money to be saved, and therefore more incentive for housing if you choose to make some of these changes. I can tell you at Firehouse, the reason you have duplexes is in front is, for example, because multifamily dwellings are not permitted in your ROC district. So the most that's permitted in that district along Main Street, and I know this has been a flashpoint before as well, are basically duplexes. Multifamily units are not permitted there. And then there's a question of, again, whether it's conditional or site plan. The Firehouse would tell you that they reduced their density and redesigned that project to make sure that they could fit within the ROC district, or the portion of that project that fell within the ROC district. Elise gave me one other example of a place where she'd like to see a multifamily, but and I think it's in your high density residential. No, it's in a place where there's. I'm gonna have to look at my notes. But she did give me a couple other examples of some big houses, big spaces in Bristol that should have or should be allowed to be multifamily, but were only allowed to be basically 2-family dwellings.
So at least probably one of them that she threw out was the old Living Well building.
Probably, yeah.
I know that they had their sights on that and were very upset that they couldn't do it.
Yep. So Elise is the executive director of Addison County Community Trust. That was one of the proponents of the Firehouse building, but just so you all know.
Yeah, so they wanted to convert, they looked at Living Well as converting that into some sort of home housing option. And it's in the HDR, and the density is what stopped it, not the conditional use. Because it's on a
Tiny property.
it's a little over a quarter, it's like 4/10 of an acre, and it had 7 rooms in it that were used for elder care. And they were hoping to convert that into some other type of housing, and there's no way to do it. To be affordable for them to go down that road.
Probably as much to do with wastewater as density as well.
Wastewater was gonna be their next huge hurdle to cross, but the density stopped them first.
Yeah, I would just think that within the confines of the current village, and as we imagine it, the future village, that is the village planning area, like if somebody's taking, like, let's say a village lot, like even a large village lot where one of the larger homes might have a whole acre. There's still several of those, I think, in the village, or the better part of an acre. In my opinion, then, like, if somebody wants to put, say, 4 or 5 or 6 dwellings in any whatever configuration on that lot where now there is, say, one large one, like that should have a high standard of review, because it's not open country, it's in the village, it's got neighbors all around. And when you think about 2 people occupying a 1-bedroom apartment, which is not an unrealistic assumption, and you have 4, say, units, you're talking about 8 cars, and perhaps instead of 2 for one family. So, right away, you start to get multiples of impacts. And it seems like 3 is good, and is seems like a reasonable, I don't know, cutoff point, not really cutoff point, but, line of demarcation. And there should be more scrutiny, not less scrutiny within the confines of the village, because if we're going to live close to each other, then we don't want to shine our lights in each other's eyes, and we don't want to hear each other's noises so much, and we don't want to, look at each other's parking so much. And there's those kinds of considerations that make dense living desirable and tolerable.
Can those be addressed by a site plan review rather than a conditional review? Those
I think
issues that
they
John was
are
talking
addressed
about?
by site plan review if it's 2 or 1 dwelling per unit, and when it steps up to
Okay.
3 or more, it's
they be
a
addressed?
little higher standard of review.
So a site plan review is reviewed by the zoning administrator, Chris? Only that
No,
goes to
that's a
the
hearing as well.
But you avoid the question, is it appropriate in this area? It's assumed to be appropriate. And you do not do site plan reviews on single or multi or two-family dwellings. You do them on multifamily, or you could do them on multifamily if you chose to. You don't have to.
Is there history why in the ROC the multi-family is not allowed?
Yes. Would you like the nickel tour on that?
Yeah.
There was a concern that the entryway into town where we have some large homes would be converted from single family homes into multifamily. Those that
Okay,
had,
yeah, okay, I know where you're going there.
and they didn't want to see West Street and East Street turned into, I kid you not, they said it over and over and over, Court Street in Middlebury, where it loses that feel. It's a different, those two, when it goes from single family to even duplex, it changes the dynamic. That was the concept back then.
Okay.
And one person who can explain it in detail is Bill.
So we're back to the question, is the by right site plan conditional use reasonable, or is it worth something we need to look at changing? Is that what I understand?
Yeah,
the
that's-
question is?
And it would be per district, right? It might be appropriate to change it in one district. It might not be appropriate to change it in another.
So we've heard from John, and a little bit from Jeff. Is anybody else forming opinions as the discussion goes along? Slim?
Yeah, the only thing that crossed my mind is that even in our village planning area, there's such a difference between the central village, which I completely agree with John, anything of any size should be very, very closely watched. They all should be closely watched, of course, but when you, let's say, get out to Plank Road or something, there seems like there is already this type of construction there. That seems like just seems like a different place entirely, compared to the central village part that has its character, and that character, I don't think it's not fair or right to change that character too much in pursuit of a higher density. Because this is what people bought their homes for, and this is how they're living there. So yeah, there's just within Bristol itself, there's very different areas. Like as we know, but that's what I think. That's what I'm thinking. That downtown is dense and needs to be protected, and some of the outer areas would be much more suitable to a larger multifamily structure. That's all.
Rob?
I think that conditional is appropriate for that level because of the impacts to the surrounding areas and as we move forward with this.
Okay, Shannon?
I agree with Rob and John on this. It's, I think, the 3 for this area, for the village.
And Melissa, did we, oh, I'm sorry, are you all,
Yeah. Just trying to be specific. I mean, for the village.
sorry. Melissa, did you comment or not?
Yeah, a lot. What do you
Okay,
think?
yeah.
I mean,
Okay,
no, I just, I'm still, I mean, to change it to 2-family, 3-family, multifamily. I don't know. Maybe I'm not seeing what you're seeing with that. I mean, I'm not talking about building apartment buildings in the main village. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about converting homes. You know, at some people, as we're going now, may not be able to afford to stay in their home if they don't, if they can't bring in some more income. That's, you know, and I would think that site permit for 3 is reasonable, and that 4 and up then becomes conditional. That's,
Okay,
you know, that's all I'm saying, is that there are a lot of big houses in town that, you know, what's going to happen to them in 10, 15, 20 years. You talk about selling it and somebody buying it as an investment. But, you know, if nobody wants to buy a huge home like that to live in it just themselves, I don't know. Maybe I'm sorry too, because I'm very, very tired right now. I did a lot today,
Okay.
so maybe I'm not thinking straight.
okay. So Jeff, did you?
Well, I think it's worth considering because the goal is to get, you know, more and more flexible housing, but you don't change anything. Now, there are other changes to consider, but I don't think it's something that has to be decided, but I think it's worth something that's worth considering, whether even a change to 3, there's no magic of 2 and 3. I'm not saying it's necessarily the thing to do, but I think it's worth exploring and a better sense of what the impact might be and what the requirements to change it would be.
Right, and also to look at some of the, for lack of better terms, unintended consequences of converting old homes. I just had this week spoke with a family that lives in Starksville that now have 4 school-age children, and driving down the mountain every day to get them to their sports and to their classes and to the play and to this is not as appealing as it used to be, and they would love to find a 4 to 5 bedroom home in the village. So if we convert a majority of our large homes to apartments, reverting them back doesn't happen easily. So so that's just one piece to think through, that there are, I mean, I look on my street, I've got a neighbor who has, between the 2 of them, they had 5 kids in one house. So they needed a larger house. So there's not a ton of that out there. That's not the norm. But once you convert a home, I mean, I have yet to see a home converted back from multifamily to single family in this area. Closest I've got is Living Well, and that had to be converted because unless you wanted to run a nursing home.
Would it be possible within the zoning, or whatever we're going to change the zoning, to limit the number that can be converted with per whatever area, street, whatever you want to?
You got discrimination when you
I
start.
don't know how many.
Well, no, it's just
I
whoever
mean,
does
we
comes
don't
along
know
first.
how many
Yeah.
would be converted.
Right.
Right.
In the market will play a major role in this.
So the other thing to think about is there has been an effort to right-size housing to the need, which now is more separated families, older people, older couples, older single people. And that speaks to why do you need a 3-bedroom house? But guess what? We still build 3-bedroom houses. So to Chris's point, there is a certain desire to live in and buy and sell a house that has more than 2 bedrooms in it. So I think that we
Practical experience, I know people, this is somewhat anecdotal, but this is something that's happened more than a few times. I mean, banks often won't loan you money to build a house that's less than 2 bedrooms because they see it as in their interest to have high resale value, and something less than 2 bedrooms historically has not sold as well as something with 3. So that's just one side story, but and I know people who have had to add homes to their 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom home plan. So they had a 3rd bedroom so they could get their bank loan and build anything at all, which is kind of weird thing that's drives that building thing. But on another subject, I mean, as a practical matter, there are very few homes, I think in Bristol at least, that could convert to 3 or 4 units, because if you're going to do a major renovation like that, you're going to have to pull permits from the state. And when you do that, a lot of homes without major rebuilding could not meet the fire and life safety code for egress and all that fire separation and all that sort of stuff without a major undertaking. And I don't know how the 3 or more number came to be in the regs, but my guess, pure speculation, is that it creates room for people to create a duplex out of their house, which is much more something that's realistic and doable in these old houses. And my guess, and it's something that people probably did historically, pretty readily. And I just don't see a huge demand for like old houses split into 4 ways. There aren't that many big ones, and doing so as a practical construction matter would be a fierce undertaking.
Well, if that's the case, then there's no harm in changing the regs, because it's not going to
That's
happen
right,
anyway.
yeah.
And the market will determine it.
We pounded that one enough.
And I think it's important to remember that the regs the regs exist for a variety of reasons, not just to make it easy for people to do development. That's not what the regs are for. The regs are to protect the public that exists, the neighbors, for example, who might have an interest in what's going on next door. And so we don't want to only consider how these regs facilitate development. We want to also consider equally, I would say, how the regs protect the existing fabric of the community and give citizens a way to participate if they feel they have concerns to do so. We're not here to roll out the red carpet for developers. We're here to help developers understand how they can develop
Nobody said, bro,
and protect.
you're going to the
I hear the rationale coming out that's how to make it easier for
move on.
developers. That's only
That's
one.
not-
Well,
nobody
We're
said that.
moving on.
okay, so, yeah, I'd say your regs serve your citizens, and it's however they want to be served. So, but yeah, we will table whether or not we do any of those. It's for later. We'll leave the opportunity open, but we'll table it for now. I'm gonna move you on to ADUs. Actually, for a moment, I'm gonna just talk about neighborhood development areas, and I'm gonna talk about the neighborhood development area at the state program. And then I'll talk about ADUs. Accessory dwelling units, excuse me.
Oh my God.
So, neighborhood development areas are a program of the state of Vermont that are also intended to basically increase density in neighborhoods and provide additional affordable mixed income housing. It doesn't have to be just affordable, it's mixed income housing. So the benefits of a neighborhood development area are, and a neighborhood development area would be around your existing designated downtown. So it would be the neighborhoods where you'd want to put housing within a half mile of your designated downtown, which is basically your main street block. Okay, so it could encompass large parts of your village planning area. The benefits are qualified mixed income projects are exempt from Act 250 regulations. If you qualify for a neighborhood development area, potentially developers could reduce their costs within the neighborhood development area within the village planning area of Bristol by just going through Bristol's regulations and not also needing to go through Act 250. If you don't qualify for an Act 250 exemption, then basically, if they're in a neighborhood development area, they would receive a 50% discount on application fees to Act 250, which can be sizable if it's a big development. It depends on the scale. Agency and natural resource fees for wastewater review are capped at $50 for projects with sewer allocation. They're exempt from land gains taxes. Limitations on appeals of conditional use permits for residential development. And municipalities will receive priority consideration for state grants. So those are some of the reasons you may want to consider this. If you choose to consider this, there are a couple of other things that we need to consider, some of which are in your control as the Planning Commission. One of them, the big one, is more in the select board's hands, and that's a wastewater system. So you don't have to have the wastewater system built, but you have to be able to show the Agency of Commerce in this case that you have plans for some type of alternative community system. So what they did at the Commons project here in Bristol is a community system. So it could be done in Bristol on small scale, even if you chose not to invest in, the town chose not to invest in a big scale facility. Other requirements, complete streets, you need to have sidewalks. I would tell you most places that we're talking about within your village planning area already have those.
Not all.
Not all, but most. And that would could affect how you laid out your area.
Sure.
Let's see. Density. And Chris has raised this before. Municipal bylaws allow minimum net residential densities greater than or equal to 4 single-family detached dwelling units per acre. Exclusive of accessory dwelling units, which we'll talk about in a minute, and no fewer than the average existing density of the surrounding neighborhood, whichever is greater. So basically consider it 4 units per acre. In your high density district, high density residential district, that is your current standard, so you meet it there. But that's
I'm sorry,
the only-
did you say attached or for attached or unattached?
Four units, 4 units per acre,
But unattached, they could be unattached.
Either or.
either or.
Okay, thank you.
So it could be a building with 4 units in it. It could be 4 little units, 4 houses on an acre. So what I was saying, your neighborhood, your high density residential district, which is the darker blue in your zoning map. You currently have 4 units per acre. In your village business district, I think you're 6 or 8 units per acre, which is the small area that's really just your main street again. All of your other areas, you're less than that. So Bristol could theoretically do the program right now in its high density residential district, but it would need to make changes to density in any of the other districts to participate if you felt the benefits that I listed before, largely Act 250 exemption and some tax breaks and some priorities for grants, were worth it to the town. So that's what you need to consider if you are interested in a neighborhood development area. Any questions about that? We don't need to make any decisions.
I've got a question about what is entailed by when you use the term unit. How many bedrooms, et cetera?
It's basically, it could be,
That's the definition that we use.
sure. I tell you, it's a place where a family unit lives. Your definition will be more eloquent than mine, but
There it is.
so dwelling unit, Chris just pulled up.
Share these guys. I'll be there. Yes, I can. There.
Dwelling unit, building or part thereof used for living quarters for one family. The term dwelling unit, single family dwelling unit, 2-family dwelling, or multifamily dwelling shall not include a boarding house. So it's basically living quarters for one family. is how you define a dwelling unit. So think separate apartments or think separate homes. They're both dwelling units.
But to Slim's point, that could be 1, 2, 3 bedrooms. There's
Yes,
no restriction on bedrooms.
that's right.
Alright, so, and then we define family, which is the big aspect in that, is right here on the screen as well. It's one or more persons living, sleeping, cooking, and eating in the same premises as a single housekeeping unit. So you could have 6 people living under the same roof. As long as they're acting as one house unit.
Adam, you said the area, is that a flexible or is that half mile from the downtown area, everything within that can qualify? Or is it, can you do a small area? Is there a limit on that?
So I guess I'd say you can draw a half acre circle around your downtown business district. And then depending on how you all wanted to make it look, you could take sections out. If you took sections out, you could add sections a little further out as long as they were contiguous. So it does not have to be a circle with a bullseye. You have some flexibility to account for terrain and for the pattern of your village and things of that nature. So
Is there a minimum size that or square footage or acreage that it needs to be?
Would you make it smaller is what he's asking. Does it have to be a half acre circle?
oh, but yeah, you can absolutely make it smaller.
Half miles.
Or half mile, sorry. That was your question, right, Rob? Could you?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
But a half mile is swinging an arc around downtown.
But
Half mile is not that big.
yeah, because if I look at the regulations here, it says it must be within a half mile from the downtown area. It doesn't say it
Yes,
includes everything in the half mile.
That's only halfway up North Street.
So it's just
Yes.
within.
If you take bites out of it, you can attach contiguous areas just outside.
I was
if
just
the
gonna say,
fabric is
Because
similar.
because the pattern of the geographic pattern of our community and what we currently have, there's also a chunk in that half mile circle that is national forest, it's in our conservation, it's the mountain. So you would carve those out and tack that acreage or that equal amount of area elsewhere in contiguous to your.
So you could extend that half mile.
Yeah, you can sort of move that circle, the center doesn't have, it's almost like you can move the circle around, the downtown doesn't have to be the center point. That's how I always looked at it.
Yeah.
Our downtown is like in the corner.
Exactly.
So.
And
so
are there
yes.
other benefits for the town? I mean, it seems like all the benefits are for developers with larger developments in the benefits of reduced fees and tax breaks. Are there benefits for the town itself apart from attracting those larger developments?
There are potentially priority consideration for state grants is one of the beneficial benefits to the town. But you're right, most of the other benefits would flow to someone trying to develop housing within the town.
Are those grants in a specific category?
So I would tell you they're certainly within the Agency of Commerce's grants. Agency of Commerce Community Development grants, so municipal planning grants, this grant, designated downtown grants, but also the NBRC. So NBRC grants, I guess I'm going to say it's largely economic development grants. I don't know how much impact it has on, say, A&R grants for wastewater systems or something of that nature.
Any other questions?
And like I say, you don't need to make a decision on this, but I'd ask you to consider whether you think the benefits justify the work that it will take. And if you want to do it, there are certain places where you're going to need to make changes to meet their guidelines.
if I recall, to consider this, not to do it, but to consider it as a requirement of our grant.
Yes, yes, it's one of the things that the grant wants us to discuss and look at.
And we are.
And we are.
Right.
Okay. Kevin, I'm a little over time.
Okay.
I had ADUs on the, maybe I introduce them and then let you be, or how would you like me to
So,
proceed?
Anybody short for time, hard stops or anything? Okay, let's
Okay,
get an overview.
let's give you a quick overview of accessory dwelling units. So
You wanna
Chris,
adapt?
I do. You have section 404 on page 51 of your zoning regulation covers
Oh,
the
yeah.
town of Bristol's accessory dwelling units. I'm not sure that there's going to be a lot that you can do with your regulations. You are already probably a little more permissive than the statute requires. So Vermont statute, in particular, Title 24, 4412, Section 4412, required provisions and prohibited effects. So notwithstanding any existing bylaw, the following land development provisions shall apply in every municipality. And one of those is basically that except for flood hazard and fluvial erosion hazard area bylaws, no bylaw shall have the effect of excluding as a permitted use one accessory dwelling unit that is located within or pertinent to a single family dwelling on an owner occupied lot. A bylaw may require a single family dwelling with an accessory dwelling unit to be subject to the same review, dimensional or other controls as required for a single family dwelling. Without an accessory dwelling unit, an accessory dwelling unit means a distinct unit that is clearly subordinate to the single family dwelling and has facilities or provisions for independent living, including sleeping, food preparation, sanitation, provided there is compliance with any of the following. The property's got to have sufficient wastewater capacity. You all don't control that. The unit does not exceed 30% of the total habitable floor area of the single family dwelling or 900 square feet, whichever is greater. You all chose to go to 1,000 square feet. But nothing in subdivision 1E, which is the one that I just read you of this section, shall be construed to prohibit a bylaw that is less restrictive of accessory dwelling units. And it doesn't restrict short-term rentals. So that's basically the statutory provision. From that statutory provision, the last time we looked at your bylaws, we created this section on accessory dwelling units. You can see it largely follows the statute, but is a little more permissive in some places. You allow the owner of the unit to be either in the accessory dwelling unit, i.e. if you get old and want to downsize, you could rent out the bigger part of your house and move into the apartment. You allowed a little greater habitable floor area up to 1,000 feet versus 900, which is the floor in the statute.
The only spot that we're a little more restrictive is where we call it that it can only be a one bedroom. That's not in statute anymore. They removed that, I thought.
You know, you're
There's just a one bedroom apartment, yeah.
And they rewrote it, they removed that. I just have notes what they're into in Moncton today.
Did it used to be less restrictive on that?
This verbiage that's in ours was almost the statute, almost cut and pasted at the time. When they rewrote
Does
it,
the statute say one bedroom?
It used
Efficiency
to,
or
it used
one
to,
bedroom?
they just changed it, what, a year and a half
Yeah.
ago?
yes.
So that's a gray area for me right now.
So ours is more restricted than the state regs. You're allowed to be less restrictive. Are you allowed to be more restrictive?
Well, the state regs are silent as to whether or not, how many units it has.
Right,
So in this particular case, you chose, well, the old you haven't made a change since when the statute changed, you did not necessarily update
we
this part
didn't,
of
we
your
didn't
bylaw,
have to, because we were already exceeding
the standard. So that is a place that you could make a change.
Is when we looked at it originally, it was the statute calls out our steps, our pieces 1 through 4. And we made sure that we followed that or exceeded we're more lenient there. The definition part, I think we felt comfortable when we wrote this, adding that as an efficiency 1-bedroom limitation, just because you could, because it doesn't say you can't.
Say that again.
The statute doesn't say that you can't
Limit bedroom.
limit the bedrooms. You have to follow the parameters of, it has,
Okay.
you can limit wastewater, the size,
Okay.
but it's a gray area. I literally stumbled on this recently.
Because, I mean, 1,000 square feet could easily be a 2-bedroom apartment.
I think I got 3-bedroom if you wanted to.
Yeah. And.
I mean, my 3-bedroom house is only 1,400.
Right.
So if somebody has a duplex already, they cannot put an ADU on their property if the house is, say, split into 2 units.
Correct.
They can't put a apartment over their garage.
No, they can add if they have the density, they can add 1 more dwelling unit, but they can't call it an accessory dwelling unit, and it counts against their density.
Right. And number 3 here in Bristol section 404 here, help me understand that. So let's say the house is, I don't know, I'm looking for an easy number, 2,000 square 2,000 square foot house. So the ADU in that instance could not be more than, let's say it's 2,100, could not be more than 700 square feet or
1,000 square feet.
or
In that case, it's the greater of, so in that case, the 1,000 square foot would control. If it were a 5,000, 6,000 square foot home, if it was a 6,000 square foot home, then basically it could be, the ADU could be up to 2,000 square feet theoretically.
or one. I'm confused by this. It seems like it's,
ass backwards.
yeah, isn't it?
I've said it for years.
So
That's
what
how
does it
statute's
mean here
written.
as it's written here? What is it? How is it? I don't get that.
It can always be 1,000 square feet
Right.
minimum. But it could be more than that if the main unit
Was
is
larger.
more than 3,300 square feet. Which is a pretty big unit for Bristol.
Yeah.
But basically, it allows you 1,000 square feet in almost all instances, right?
Yep.
Maximum
I've
like
had-
1,000 square feet, isn't it?
Yes, up to 1,000.
Yeah, it allows you up to 1,000.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no matter
But
how
if you
big your
have a-
house is, it's 1,000 square feet.
Oh, no, if your house is over 3,300 square feet, it goes up incrementally. That's where you hit the 30%. So if you have a 4,000 square foot house, 30% of that is 1,200 square feet.
Oh, the greater of, okay,
Greater of.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, 1,000 is the smallest threshold. But I believe it's the efficiency or 1-bedroom piece that keeps it from creating a duplex under the ADU definition.
For our def, yeah.
Wow.
So the creating of the ADU does not technically create a duplex. It's only if the primary building is a duplex. That's when the prohibition kicks in. Do I have that right?
Correct. It can only happen on a single family home.
Gotcha.
And does the selling of the home I don't want to venture too far. I know this is going to venture too far. The selling of the
Down
home,
the
does that
rabbit
make
hole.
it a non-conforming use when if it is not owner occupied afterward?
Yes, potentially according to the statute.
And I had a question, does that, only one ADU per dwelling, per home?
Yeah.
That's how the statute's set up,
That's-
yes.
And that's Bristol, or is that state? What,
Statewide.
state? Okay. So you can't have two garages with apartments over them?
No.
So there's no way if somebody has a duplex, they could come to the zoning board, say, and get, say, conditional use. They could still not get conditional use to have an ADU. That's not, it's like a clear line. You can't do that.
Well, an ADU's it's supposed to be attached, well, it's attached to single family dwellings, so it doesn't apply to duplexes, and it's a permitted use, so theoretic, if you're allowed to do it, you can get the permit from Chris, from the zoning administrator,
But not if you have a duplex.
but not if you have a duplex.
What
Yeah,
John's question
that's-
is, if you own a duplex, is there a way to get an ADU? I don't think there is an easy, I don't think it would happen.
Not under your current regs,
Which follow the state statute, right?
which
But
follow
that's
the
the
state statute.
So that's a 3-unit development.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, this is my thing with this. I would rather have us, instead of focus on ADUs, I know the state's focused on these. Figure out how do we make duplexes, because everyone who comes into my office wants to do an ADU because they're looking for an apartment on their house. But they want a 2-bedroom. They don't want to, I don't know, it just seems like fix it so that we just call apartments. Stop with the ADU exception. It doesn't count towards density is the only advantage to doing this. And then you have to play by all these other rules. So let's just make it so that you can do a small apartment on your house and not have to go through this, and we just call it an apartment. It's just my soapbox. I've been good enough. I'm irritable about this one today.
I call where I live an apartment, not an ADU, so.
There are definitely people looking to use the ADUs to get around.
Oh, hell yeah. It's the number one use. It's no longer being used for people to set up so that their parents can age in place, or that their kids can have a live in their house in their own domicile. That's not the number one use. The number one use is people are looking for rental revenue, hands down.
But that's neither good nor bad. That's just a fact.
That's just a fact. Yeah.
Yeah, but
That's
that's
just a fact.
providing more housing.
Let's just make it so that they can create an apartment,
But
and
the issue is they want to do it that way because they can't
they don't have the
Why?
density. They don't have the density to do it.
do it the other way.
So there's no density restriction on the ADU.
It doesn't count toward
No.
it doesn't count toward the density.
Density's come up a number of times in the conversation so far tonight, and I just wonder, Adam, is that on our docket at some point in this process to look at those densities? I imagine so, but
Absolutely. I was hoping I could get some of the easier or what I thought might be easier ones done first. But so yes,
Times, Adam.
the answer is we'll definitely get there.
good. I mean, I like I'm eager for that conversation.
Okay, is
So
there any other questions about ADUs? Ken?
How about this? How about if I work with Chris, who seems to have an opinion on these, to create something that might work for the things that he's been seeing in his office a lot, and bring it back to you next time.
I think that's useful because then you're not wasting time on things which may not have much relevance. If we want to do the things which have the greatest impact, potentially the greatest impact.
Anybody have a problem with that? Okay, sounds like a great idea.
I just got homework. It's all good.
You love your work.
Okay,
Tell us.
so that's where well, those are the topics that I wanted to cover with you tonight.
Good work.
Almost perfect time.
Stop.
I think we've had a great discussion tonight.
Okay, so when is your next meeting?
Should be the third Tuesday, right?
It's sort of settled on third Tuesdays, if that works for you.
Does that work
Okay.
with Thanksgiving?
That's what I was just looking at.
Ah,
It's Thanksgiving week, but
Okay,
it's a Tuesday before.
It's the Tuesday, the 22nd, right? Is that
No,
right?
wait a minute.
this
No,
is.
that's
This is.
oh, sorry, I'm bad. I just it's
December?
Oh my God, I'm so
Is there
far
another
behind.
Thanksgiving in December?
No, I'm off. My
The
brain is
third
stuck.
Tuesday is the
Be the
15th.
20th.
No,
No, the 15th is. the
15th.
third.
Today, so we're looking at the December meeting.
Oh, we're in the
The
December. meeting,
13th.
Of course, we're in
20th.
November, aren't we? The
Tuesday.
13th.
20th is the third.
December 20th is the third
Is the third.
Thursday of December, third Tuesday of December.
December
everybody.
20th it is. Okay, I will come back to you on December 20th. I will bring back basically some some examples of step multifamily definitions. And Chris and I will work on ADUs and bring back some suggestions for you. And
Sounds good.
when I say work on ADUs, it might involve duplexes ADUs. Then we will try and move into the districts themselves. And that's where we start talking about density.
Nice.
Are there other
Sounds good.
classifications, Adam, that aren't used in our regs apart from duplex or ADU as far as dwelling units that I know it's adding more into the mix, but would a different classification help things?
The only thing that I can think of is a tier, and whether it's one tier or two tiers of multifamily, that might be helpful. Otherwise, I don't think any other tier would be helpful.
I didn't know if there was like an apartment classification as opposed to multifamily or something like that, you know. Okay.
No, we may also, but I may wade into mobile home parks briefly with you.
Yep.
And we'll see how that goes. So that's kind of your other classification. You can't discriminate against them, but most of your existing mobile home parks, they're grandfathered, otherwise they don't meet your densities in most places. Which means nobody builds new mobile home parks. So I don't know whether Bristol has any desire for that or not, but we will wade into that next time too.
Great,
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you all.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks.
I'll see you in a month.
Yay.
Bingo business.
bye now.
Take care.
So we will move to item 2. Which we moved delayed. The first item is approval of the minutes. They are attached. Does anybody have any changes, alterations, comments about the minutes? Does anybody feel compelled to formally approve them, or we'll just take note that there was no changes?
Adequate.
Okay,
Okay, take care of that one. Next item is the zoning administrator report.
No report.
Anybody have any questions for Chris? I do.
Okay.
So I walked down Mountain Street the other day and there's a whole bunch of red steel poking up in what I call back of Pat Smith's house.
Yeah.
That's the landmark. So what?
Off Garfield Street.
Yeah,
yeah,
it looks like it must be on Garfield.
it's hard to tell
It is.
where it's.
It's off Garfield Street. It's 22, 24 Garfield, I think is the number, 24, 26.
Be the next place down.
That's an accessory building.
They're doing with steel girders.
It's an accessory building.
It looks like,
Barn.
looks like an aircraft hangar.
Oh, so accessory, not accessory unit, it's a,
Well, he wanted to do an accessory dwelling unit in as well, in the upstairs of it. But the front building is a duplex, so he's holding off on that at this point.
so
in
this
time.
is just a barn or
Yeah.
garage. or
It's a
whatever.
two-story garage. Big,
You chose steel. It's kind of.
well, more cost effective.
Okay, enough of that, let's gossip. Any other questions for Chris? Next item is ARPA Funding Advisory Committee update.
So
Bob.
that's moving forward. We are in the process of narrowing down and working on putting together a package to put forth to the town for final input before it goes to the select board in its final form, which is only a couple months away in March, I believe.
Okay. Any questions for Rob? Okay. So that brings us to item D, miscellaneous correspondence. Since the last meeting, I received, and most of this stuff was sent out and is attached to the minutes or the agenda. Received from AARP, a list of free publications. You're certainly welcome to pursue that if you like. Received an inquiry about how revising these bylaws that we're discussing today might allow an individual to put in an ADU where they have a duplex right now, I believe. So that was germane to our conversation. It'll be ongoing, I'm sure. I apologize for not communicating this out, but I did engage with Myron Howell of the Addison Independent, did a interview with her. And the article was published, I think, in last week's edition. There is a link, if you didn't see the article, there is a link that hopefully will get you there if you need it or want to see it.
I thought it was a great article, Kevin, but you did a good job.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was, of all the things I've been doing lately, it was a positive thing.
There you go.
Yeah, and she talked to Adam a little bit, and I also indicated to her that, you know, other surrounding towns, primarily Lincoln, was pursuing a grant as well. So I think she talked to Katie and Lincoln a little bit too. So it was, yeah, it was pretty rounded.
The article seemed to me to be both accurate and positive, which is a good hit.
The town received a grant for diversity, equity, and inclusion. The acronym is DEI, which Valerie and Porter Knight are working on. And I did include the grant summary as well as some description here and the chair notes. There is an ongoing process to look at current websites, procedures, that sort of thing, that are written documents as to any sort of, in most of it's unintended, but any sort of bias that may be in them. There will be a certain amount of training that is required of all employees and recommended for all individuals that serve on boards, probably in the spring. There is a process that they're developing to provide a checklist, a gate. Porter referred to it as a speed bump that would be used to check against any sort of activity, particularly like documents and procedures and bylaws that like we're working on, to assure that there's inclusivity and that there is not any unintended equity issues in that. We've been identified as a group that, particularly with this bylaw effort, as a group that would be a good beta operations. So tentatively, Porter will be here in our January meeting to kind of give us a little bit more background and kind of lay out what the expectations are. We'll kick the tires with whatever her concept is, see if it works, it doesn't work, that type of thing. And then there's a final part of it where there's a review with the select board to of the recommendations and see what needs to be implemented or has been implemented. I've talked to Adam a little bit about it. He was nervous that it would add complexity to the efforts that we're going through right now. I'm trying to stay positive and thinking that we shouldn't get hung up with, we shouldn't be looking at a process that's going to hang up the work of this board or other boards trying to develop procedures. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. There are two recent conversations. One was in a telephone conversation I had, which I did shoot out maybe yesterday with an individual that was concerned about an Act 250 permit that's in process in the Notch. It seemed that they were mostly trying to understand the process. They had some concerns, but it didn't sound like they were concerns that it would cause the permit or the permit process to take a different direction. So I sent that out to you, and then there is a continuing activities with flood resilience hazard planning that I got an email from Valerie on that today, and I'll send that out. So if anybody's interested in pursuing those, you'll have the information. And I think that's it for miscellaneous correspondence. Does anybody have any questions or comments with regards to that? Crickets, like it. So we have no new business. So I guess the next item would be public comment. Do we have any public comment? Hearing none. The next item is adjournment, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
And Melissa seconds. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
I,
I,
Opposed?
No.
Abstaining?
Up.
Okay. Thank you. We're a little over,
Thanks.
but we had a great
Good night.
discussion tonight.
good night.
Thank you all.
Right.
Night.
good night.